to Co-Pilot Podcasts. Ancient Sumer, Indigenous North America, Medieval Europe, Modern Cinema. The exact same story has been told independently across every one of those cultures. A hero leaves home, faces trials in a strange world, and returns fundamentally changed. Joseph Campbell called it the monomyth. But here's the part that stops you cold. Researchers now believe that pattern isn't a storytelling convention. It's the mind mapping its own structure onto story. Today, we're unpacking what that means for you, specifically how the hero's journey framework connects to the science of resilience and self-belief, why the way you narrate your own life actually changes your psychological outcomes, and what you can do right now to start rewriting the story you tell about yourself. And to dig into all of this, I've got someone who has really gone deep on the research here. Let's get into it. What is it about this ancient story pattern that makes it so psychologically loaded?
So the thing that makes it loaded is exactly what you said. It's not just a story structure, it's a map of how the human psyche actually processes transformation. Campbell published The Hero with 1,000 Faces in 1949, and his central argument was that this pattern, departure, ordeal, return, transformed, wasn't coincidence across cultures. It was the mind externalizing its own internal process.
So we've been telling ourselves the same story forever, basically.
Essentially, yeah. And what's fascinating is that modern psychology has caught up to that. Narrative therapy, which is a legitimate clinical approach, draws directly on these mythic structures to help people reframe their experiences, reclaim agency, and build resilience. It's not metaphor for the sake of it, it's a functional tool. Okay, so when you say narrative therapy uses this, what does that actually look like in practice? Because I think a lot of people hear hero's journey and think like Star Wars, not therapy.
Right, and that's a fair instinct. But there's actually a published curriculum called The Hero's Journey Path to Wellbeing. It was developed by Dorio Burton and Becker and studied in the American Journal of Psychiatric Rehabilitation. It was designed specifically for people living with long-term mental health challenges. And the preliminary findings were genuinely encouraging. It showed promise for giving people an alternative self-narrative, building hope and empowerment as they identify and use what the researchers called their inner hero in daily life.
Wait, so this isn't just a motivational poster thing, this is a clinical intervention.
Exactly. And the framework maps really cleanly onto the therapeutic process. Terror counseling breaks it down stage by stage. The call to adventure is the moment someone recognizes they need to change, which in therapy might be a crisis or just a persistent feeling that something's off. The refusal of the call is that hesitation before starting therapy, the fear of vulnerability, the stigma. And then there's the abyss.
The abyss. That sounds ominous. What is that in real life?
It's the darkest point. In the myth, it's where the hero faces their deepest fear. In therapy, it's the moment when someone feels most overwhelmed by their struggles. But, and this is the counterintuitive part, it's also described as a critical juncture where significant breakthroughs often occur. Facing the abyss is what allows someone to emerge stronger.
So the worst moment is also potentially the turning point.
That's the framework, yeah. And it resonates because it's not telling you the hard part won't happen. It's telling you the hard part is part of the story, not the end of it.
You know, that actually reminds me of something I came across, the semicolon tattoo movement. Project Semicolon, where people literally tattoo a semicolon on their skin as a symbol that their story isn't over. A semicolon is where an author could have ended the sentence but chose not to. And in their research study of 951 people, 43% of participants with semicolon tattoos described the act as not just symbolic, but therapeutic, turning trauma into what they called survival art.
That's such a powerful example of narrative identity made physical. You're literally inscribing your survival onto your body. And it connects to something deeper in the research, the idea that the stories we tell about ourselves aren't just descriptions, they're constructions. They shape how we move through the world.
Okay, so let's pivot to the science side of this. Because the hero's journey is a compelling frame, but what does the actual psychology research say about self-belief and resilience? Like, is there hard data here?
There is, and it's pretty striking. So the key concept you need to understand is self-efficacy. It's defined as the belief in one's own ability to overcome obstacles and complete tasks. Not confidence in a vague sense, it's specifically about your belief that you can handle what's in front of you.
And that's different from just, like, feeling good about yourself?
Meaningfully different. Self-esteem is more about your overall sense of worth. Self-efficacy is task-specific and forward-looking. And the research on how it connects to resilience is really compelling. A 2025 study published in Frontiers in Psychology out of Ataturk University in Turkey looked at 481 student athletes and found that self-efficacy significantly and positively predicted psychological resilience with a beta coefficient of 0.517. That's a strong relationship.
So, the more you believe you can handle things, the more resilient you actually become.
And it doesn't stop there. Both self-efficacy and psychological resilience were significant predictors of life satisfaction in that same study. So it's this chain. Belief in yourself feeds resilience, and resilience feeds how satisfied you are with your life overall.
That's a pretty powerful chain. But I want to push on something here because there's a version of this conversation that just becomes believe in yourself and everything will work out. And that feels a little thin, right? Like, what about people dealing with real structural barriers?
That's exactly the right pushback, and the research actually addresses it directly.
The Center for Mindful Psychotherapy put out a 2026 guide on building mental health resilience, and they're pretty explicit about this. They say decades of research consistently point to the same factors for resilience: secure relationships, internal regulation skills, a sense of meaning, supportive communities, and access to material resources. And then they add, notably, individual willpower is not high on the list.
Oh, that's a really important distinction. It is. They put it really well. Resilience is built through context as much as through character. So the hero's journey framing isn't about telling someone to just grit their teeth and push through. In fact, that same guide explicitly says resilience is not the same as toughness, and it is not the same as never breaking down.
So what does resilience actually look like then, if it's not pushing through?
They define it as the capacity to adapt to stress, recover from difficulty, and continue functioning, often with new strengths developed through the difficulty itself. And here's the part that I think is genuinely counterintuitive. They say, the resilient response to genuine adversity sometimes includes rage, grief, withdrawal, and yes, breakdown. What makes it resilient is not the absence of those responses, but the presence of resources that allow recovery and continued growth.
So, breaking down can be part of being resilient. That's not what the wellness industry usually sells you.
Right, and they call that out directly. They say the wellness industry has often distorted the word resilience into something that looks more like compliance than actual capacity, which is a pretty sharp critique.
Yeah, that lands. And it connects back to the hero's journey, actually, because the hero doesn't skip the abyss. The abyss is mandatory.
Exactly. And the research on post-traumatic growth backs this up in a really striking way. According to NeuroLaunch's analysis of the hero's journey in psychology, people who grow after crisis often describe a permanent identity shift, not a return to baseline. The hero doesn't go home the same person. That's actually the whole point of the journey.
That's kind of a radical idea, though, right? Because most of us, when we're going through something hard, we just want to get back to normal. We want to return to baseline.
And that impulse makes complete sense. But the research suggests that framing, I just want to get back to who I was, might actually work against growth. If you're the hero of your own story, the journey changes you. The version of you that comes out the other side has capabilities the version that went in didn't have.
Okay, so how does storytelling fit into all of this? Because we've talked about the hero's journey as a framework, we've talked about self-efficacy as a mechanism, but there's also this whole body of work on actually telling your story as a healing act.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really concrete. Project Semicolon conducted a study of 951 people who had publicly or privately shared their mental health stories. And the findings were significant. 84% of participants described a release of shame after sharing their story, even in anonymous or private formats. One participant said, and I'm quoting directly, "I hated myself until I put it into words. Then I saw I was just hurting, not broken."
That quote is something. Just hurting, not broken. That's a completely different story about the same experience.
That's exactly it. And 71% of participants said storytelling helped them connect with others who had similar experiences. It broke isolation and replaced it with belonging. Another participant said, "I thought I was alone until someone commented, 'Me too.'" That's the community dimension of resilience research keeps pointing to.
So telling your story isn't just cathartic, it's actually building the social infrastructure that resilience depends on.
Precisely. And narrative psychiatry frames this in a really interesting way. The question isn't just what symptoms do you have, it's what is your story? How do you understand your suffering? What meaning have you assigned to your experience? Because in many cases, the act of telling one's story becomes part of the healing process itself.
And that connects back to the hero's journey because the hero's journey is fundamentally a story about meaning making. The trials aren't random, they're the thing that forges the hero.
Right. And Carl Jung's theory of archetypes provides the psychological backbone for why this resonates so universally. The recurring characters, the mentor, the shadow, the threshold guardian, they're not just narrative devices, they're representations of internal psychological forces. The mentor in the hero's journey is the part of you that already knows the way.
Okay, I want to bring in the practical side here because I think some listeners might be sitting with this and thinking, this is all compelling, but what do I actually do with it? Like, how do you build self-efficacy and resilience in a concrete way?
So the Global Health Beacon's 2026 Guide on Young Adult Resilience breaks this down into a few key practices. The first is developing a growth mindset, and this is specifically about reframing failures. Instead of a rejected job application being a judgment on your potential, a growth mindset treats it as valuable feedback. Failures become temporary data points, not permanent verdicts.
Temporary data points. I like that framing.
And the second big one is social connection, and this isn't just feel-good advice. The research consistently shows that individuals with robust support networks navigate stress more effectively and recover faster from adversity. The guide describes social connections as critical resilience infrastructure, not emotional luxuries.
Infrastructure. That's a strong word for friendship.
It is, but it's accurate. And the third piece is mindfulness, and again, not in a trendy way. The Global Health Beacon cites research indicating that consistent mindfulness practice can reduce stress markers by up to 40% and improve emotional regulation skills. Even 5 minutes of focused breathing can reset your nervous system.
So it's not about grand gestures. It's about consistent small practices that build the conditions for resilience.
Exactly. And that maps back to what the Center for Mindful Psychotherapy said: resilience is built through context as much as through character. You're not just trying to be a tougher person, you're building an environment and a set of habits that make recovery possible.
And the hero's journey framing helps with that because it gives you a narrative container for the hard stuff. Instead of, why is this happening to me? It becomes, this is the part of the story where I face the trial.
And that shift in framing is not trivial. The Frontiers in Psychology study from Seihan University, which looked at 804 undergraduates, found that academic self-efficacy positively predicted academic buoyancy and psychological well-being. And qualitative interviews emphasized that social support was identified as essential in fostering resilience. So the narrative and the community reinforce each other.
I want to come back to something you said earlier about the hero's journey having real limits, because I think it's important not to oversell this. What are the critiques?
Yeah, this is worth sitting with. NeuroLaunch's analysis of the hero's journey in psychology is pretty direct about this. Critics point to its male-centric origins and cultural blind spots. Campbell's original framework was drawn heavily from Western and patriarchal mythologies, and the analysis notes it works best when applied flexibly rather than as a rigid template.
So it's a useful map, not the territory.
Exactly. And the same caution applies to the self-efficacy research. The Maastricht University meta-analysis on self-esteem and self-compassion, published in Psychological Research and Behavioral Management in 2023, looked at how these self-related concepts play a role in human resilience and well-being. And the nuance there is that self-compassion, being kind to yourself when you fail, is just as important as self-belief. You can't just believe your way through everything.
So self-belief without self-compassion is kind of incomplete.
That's a good way to put it. The hero who never forgives themselves for stumbling doesn't make it through the abyss. Self-compassion is what lets you pick yourself back up without the weight of self-judgment crushing you.
And that's actually a really different message from what a lot of hustle culture puts out there, which is basically, be relentless, never stop, never break down.
Right. And the research pushes back on that pretty firmly. The 2026 Resilience Guide is explicit. Resilience is not pretending to be fine when you are not. It is not the absence of pain or the avoidance of feeling. The wellness industry has distorted the word into something that looks more like compliance than actual capacity.
Compliance versus capacity. That's a really sharp distinction.
And it matters because if you're performing resilience, just looking like you're holding it together, you're not actually building it. Real resilience is about having the internal and external resources to recover. not about never needing to.
So when you step back from everything we've covered today, the hero's journey as a psychological map, the science of self-efficacy, the power of storytelling, the real definition of resilience, what's the through line here?
The through line is that the story you tell about your life is not just a description of what happened. It's a construction that shapes what happens next. Narrative therapy, the hero's journey framework, the Project Semicolon research, they all point to the same thing. When you reframe your experience as something you're moving through rather than something that's happening to you, your psychological outcomes actually change.
And the science backs that up. Self-efficacy predicting resilience, resilience predicting life satisfaction, storytelling reducing shame in 84% of participants. These aren't soft ideas. There's real data behind them.
And the practical implication is that you don't have to wait until you feel like a hero to start framing your life that way. The growth mindset research says failures are temporary data points. The hero's journey says the abyss is not the end, it's the turning point. You can adopt that frame right now before you feel like you've earned it.
Yeah, and I think the piece that really stays with me is what the post-traumatic growth research found, that people who grow after crisis describe a permanent identity shift, not a return to baseline. You're not trying to get back to who you were, you're becoming someone new. That's not a consolation prize, that's the whole journey.
And the community piece matters too. The Project Semicolon data showed that 71% of people who shared their story found connection, that Me Too moment that breaks isolation. You don't have to be the lone hero. The best heroes have a community around them.
So the actionable takeaway here, if you're sitting with something hard right now, is to ask yourself, what story am I telling about this? Is it a story where I'm a victim of circumstances? Or is it a story where I'm in the middle of a trial that's going to change me? And then, who's in your corner? Because resilience is built through context as much as through character.
And if you're in the abyss right now, that darkest point, the research says that's actually where the breakthrough tends to happen. Not despite the darkness, but because of it. The hero doesn't skip that chapter. Neither do you.
Here's what I keep coming back to. We started with this idea that the same story has been told across every culture on Earth. Ancient Sumer, indigenous North America, medieval Europe, your Netflix queue. And Joseph Campbell's argument was that it wasn't coincidence. It was the mind mapping its own structure onto story. Which means the hero's journey isn't something that happens to fictional characters. It's something that's already happening to you. The only question is whether you're the author or just a character who doesn't know they're in a story. Thanks for being here on Copilot Podcasts, and whatever chapter you're in,